We begin with an important story about a president admitting a major infraction today. You know, Richard Nixon often tried to hide the fact that he kept an enemies list, but basically there is something happening right now. Donald Trump is doing something you may have seen him do before with other damning admissions. He is now admitting that his motivation is building an enemies list, and he's doing it in public. This is a continuation of the story you know about, the White House revoking former CIA Director John Brennan's security clearance, which has gotten criticism all over the place. And now the admiral who oversaw the bin Laden raid weighing in today, telling Donald Trump, hey, revoke my security clearance as well. What we see here is a president trying to publicly abuse intelligence powers to retaliate. And there are worries that this could silence some national security experts, particularly people who might work in private consulting but still need a clearance. But it's not working on Brennan. Let me show you this. Today, he says that Donald Trump's many claims of no collusion with Russia are, quote, hogwash. He says in writing in the New York Times that Donald Trump colluded, and the only remaining question is whether that collusion itself amounts to a felony. And as Trump admits his motivation was to hit back at critics, he's undercutting his own team, which you've probably seen on TV, was claiming, apparently falsely, that Brennan's clearance was revoked only because of an allegation he misled the government about whether CIA officials had previously improperly accessed congressional staffers' files. Now, that history and that fight with Congress may be important, but Donald Trump himself admits in this new interview that was not the reason, instead saying, I call it the rigged witch hunt, it is a sham, and these people led it, adding, I think something had to be done, referencing hitting back at Brennan. Now, while it may not be a crime to revoke a security clearance for improper reasons, that itself is debatable, Donald Trump's new admission has echoes of his public confession after firing Comey, when he contradicted his own White House statement that originally claimed Comey was fired for a different reason, losing the support of FBI employees.
When I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election that they should have won.
Now, we can't compare this story about security clearances to, say, the Obama or Clinton administration, because those presidents never publicly admitted to abusing security clearance powers to settle political scores. But there are Republicans who struck a tone tonight that would be hard to imagine if this was not something being done by their own party's president.
Mr. Brennan has gone way over the line, in my view, and I think restricting his clearance, pulling his clearance makes sense to me.
Why do people who no longer work for the federal government still continue to have a security clearance?
Yes, it was. And again, it has nothing to do with starting the Russian investigation or anything else.
I am comfortable with the president's national security decisions, period.
It was about time that he did take away that, because Brennan has been very outspoken. I don't blame the president for doing what he did to Brennan.
This is, of course, a controversy driven deliberately by the White House, and it comes at the moment of maximum worry over Paul Manafort's trial. And as Bob Mueller bears down on getting a Trump interview, Trump's own lawyer feeling the heat because they are leaking new plans to fight a subpoena from Mueller for that interview if it arrives. I'm joined now by Congressman Jerrold Nadler, the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, right in the middle of these debates and perhaps in charge, depending on what happens in November. And Clint Watts, a former FBI special agent who has, I'm told, your security clearance?
Yes.
We'll see what happens. He's the author of Messing with the Enemy. And I don't say that to make light of it, but first, the congressman and then you, walk us through why it has always been normal course for many Americans after government service to retain a clearance, and for that judgment about it to be driven by security and not their First Amendment right to speak about any government official.
Well, those are two questions. It's been the practice for people, especially high-ranking security people, to retain the security clearance precisely so that the new administration can avail itself of their expertise and experience when necessary. So that, for example, if the CIA catches someone or suspects someone of being an agent, a foreign agent or something, they can call in Brennan and say, what do you know about this guy, etc. And without a lengthy period of clearing him for secret information. And it's really for the benefit of the new administration. It's not for the benefit of the former officials. Secondly, and there is a process for removing clearances. if the person shows for some reason that he's unreliable or she's unreliable at keeping secrets, then the security clearance ought to be removed. It certainly should not be removed because that person avails themselves of their First Amendment rights, which they, like any other American, have a right to do, to criticize the administration or to express an opinion on a political issue, because it's got nothing to do with their security clearance. And to revoke the security clearance because of that is to tell people, you may not express yourselves, you may not use your First Amendment rights. We are starting to crack down on the First Amendment. We're being un-American. And especially it tells people whose jobs, not usually former heads of CIA, but other people who may work in sensitive positions who need a security clearance, who may work in a private industry where they need it, which has government contracts and you need a security clearance, that if you criticize the administration, your security clearance and your job may be threatened. That's what you expect in an authoritarian dictatorship, not in a free country, and that's why this is so pernicious.
Yeah, it's rather interesting because I don't think the president entirely understands what security clearances are for. There's two parts to it. One's eligibility to access, and the second part is having access to it. So formers, people that have worked in the government, that are going back in or interfacing, they keep their eligibility for access that allows the government to bring those people back in. And if they want to run something by them, if they want to read them into something or discuss classified information, either that person worked on or new developments, they can do that. Without that clearance, they can't do that. They would have to go through an entire process, oftentimes one's at many years in the running, and one that is so far behind right now that they can't even keep up with the number of clearances. We've talked about it on the show just with a lot of the White House staffers that are
right. I mean,
clearance.
And that goes to why it's good for the government. The question of is this retaliation and should this even be allowed is a larger constitutional one. I want to add to our discussion Joyce Vance, who we often call on for big legal questions, a former federal prosecutor. Take a listen to Senator Warner likening this to an enemies list, which is the kind of thing that actually courts can get involved in patrolling if it's bad enough. Take a look.
This had an eerie memory of an enemies list. These people were being singled out to have either their clearances revoked or in the process of being revoked. To me, smacks of Nixonian-type practices of trying to silence anyone who's willing to criticize this president.
Joyce, I think our experts thus far tonight have discussed why this looks bad, why it's petty, and why it is perhaps problematic for the national security interests of the United States. It is, of course, a higher bar than all of those things to get into whether this is the kind of thing that could be unconstitutional or illegal or that a courts would get involved in. I wonder your analysis at that level.
Well, this is retaliation, pure and simple. Not only does the president not try to hide it with some kind of window dressing, he just flat out acknowledges that it's retaliation. So it's very reminiscent of this controversy that we had over the firing of Jim Comey, where the president and his team said, but I'm entitled to fire the director of the FBI whenever I want to. And the response is that's true, but it can become criminal conduct if you do it for the wrong reasons, if you do it with illegal intent. Just like the Rod Blagojevich case in Chicago, where he was entitled to appoint a senator to replace Barack Obama. He just wasn't entitled to take a bribe in exchange for making that decision. So now where we are today is we've got a president who yet again is talking about making a decision for the wrong reasons. I think his counsel's office will be very hard-pressed when they go back and look at the reasons for yanking a security clearance to justify taking away John Brennan's clearance. And the president has told us why he did it. The problem, Ari, is that the real loser is the American people, because John Brennan won't be eligible to be read in on an operation where he would need a security clearance, and we won't have the benefit of his expertise when our country faces a danger.
Congressman, take a listen to what we've learned from John Dean about the original Nixon enemies list and contrast that to the White House today. Take a look.
The memorandum that was requested by me to prepare a means to attack the enemies of the White House. There was also maintained what was called an enemies list, which was rather extensive and continually being updated.
I have decided to revoke the security clearance of John Brennan, former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. I am evaluating action with respect to the following individuals: James Clapper, James Comey, Michael Hayden, Sally Yates, Susan Rice, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and Bruce Orr.
We put those side by side, Congressman, because, as you know, the Dean testimony came only after he left the White House, said this was bad, and admitted it in the context of cooperation. Today, it would seem, according to critics, that it's getting worse because the White House is admitting it by someone who is standing at the podium listing off their actual, well-known from that list, public political opponents.
Well, I agree, but there are two things here. Number one, there seems to be an enemies list, and the president, in the case of Brennan, is punishing a perceived political enemy. In the case of these other people, is threatening to punish them. He's threatening to punish them for their First Amendment free speech, which is bad for the Constitution and for freedom. He's threatening to improperly use his power to do it. That's an abuse of power. One of the Nixon impeachment articles was abuse of power. This would fit in as an abuse of power, and it also deprives the American people of their expertise. But he also told the Wall Street Journal, in addition to that, that he removed Brennan's clearance because Brennan was in at the start of the phony Russian investigation. So this seems to be also an attempt to interfere with the Russian investigation, along with many other attempts, which would seem to beg for an evaluation as to whether it constitutes an instance of obstruction of justice.
Which, as you raise, is very serious. We've spoken now about several aspects of what is problematic on the White House side. I want to turn, in fairness, and look at John Brennan, who, as I've stated here as a journalist, has every right to state these views without the fear of retaliation. Having said that, and separate from that, he is also someone who, like you, knows certain things that he's not supposed to get into. And I want to read from Republican Senator Burr, who makes an important criticism. I wonder your analysis. Yeah. If Brennan has some personal knowledge or evidence of collusion, it should be disclosed to the special counsel, not the New York Times, and that Mr. Brennan for a long time said less, and now that he's in a very high-stakes fight with the president, including potential abuses that we've documented, he seems to be saying more. Does that not open up him to the criticism that he's dialing it up within the context of this debate, and that his collusion analysis should be reserved for investigative process?
Yeah, the dialing up, I think, is a dangerous thing for these officials. Unless they can really come forth and talk about it, they should not be talking about it. But what I find interesting about that list, if you go down from it, it's everybody that was involved with bringing the Russia investigation to the president. Anybody that has done that is on that list. But there's also one person on there that is different from the rest, General Hayden. General Hayden, he's not part of the Russia investigation. He's not brought it up. He's not part of the hoax. He's someone who served under a Republican administration, both at the NSA and the CIA, a longtime civil servant, and yet he is being targeted explicitly for being, outspoken against the president.
Now, technically, I'm over time, but Congressman, I believe I saw you strongly disagreeing with me, and we try to get all views here. So please go ahead and tell me why I'm wrong.
Disagreeing, not with you, but with the gentleman to my right. Mr. Hayden has not disclosed any private or secret information about alleged collusion. He simply stated his conclusion about collusion. That's his opinion. He's entitled to state his opinion.
But do you think Brennan is dialed up too much?
Rather.
Oh, you meant Brennan.
I meant Brennan. He stated his conclusion. He didn't reveal any secret information. If he has any, he should take it to the special prosecutor. He simply stated his conclusion, I presume, based on the public record.
Copy. And I think that's a point that is clearly being debated, but important to get your views on that. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.